The signal smelled wrong. I know that is not a precise technical description. I know it does not belong in an official incident report. But after 27 years commanding deep space recovery operations for the Keth'vali Salvage Authority, I have learned to trust the way certain data feels when it arrives, the same way I trust the electrical prickle along my throat sac before a storm front rolls in from the dark. Some information arrives cleanly. It slots into the known universe and stays there. This signal did not do that. It arrived at 0312 standard hours on the 44th day of what was supposed to be a routine survey pass through the Verath corridor. My junior analyst, Kel, was the one who caught it. A young Keth'vali barely 3 years out of the Navigational Academy, scales still the bright copper of someone who has not yet seen enough of the deep black to dull them. She was supposed to be logging micro-debris signatures. Instead, she crossed the operations deck in 4 quick strides and pressed her data slate against my console without a word. Her throat sac was the color of old ash. I looked at the readout. Then I looked at it again. The signal was a Class 1 emergency beacon, the oldest format still recognized in the Galactic Registry. A format so old that our software decoded it through a compatibility layer we kept installed out of historical obligation, the way you keep a dead language in a database because someone important once spoke it. The beacon was broadcasting on the frequency reserved for the generation ships, the human generation ships, the ones that left their home system before the humans even knew there was a galactic community waiting for them, the ships that left 900 years ago. I pulled the registry file. The ship's identifier resolved after 4 seconds of database search, which told me how buried it was. The ISV Perseverance, human-built, launched in what their calendar marked as 2089, carrying 11,000 colonists in rotating cryogenic suspension toward a star system that, by the time they were scheduled to arrive, humanity had already reached by conventional FTL drive and colonized by conventional means. The Perseverance had become obsolete before it finished its first quarter of the journey. The colony it was sailing toward already had a population of 2 million when the ship crossed the halfway point. The official record noted that contact was lost at year 412 of the voyage. The colonists aboard were presumed dead. The ship was logged as a derelict hazard. The file was closed, sealed, and transferred to the Historical Curiosity Archive, where it had been gathering digital dust for nearly 5 centuries. And now it was broadcasting. Not a ghost signal. Not a recorded loop. A live, responsive handshake protocol emergency beacon with active life support telemetry attached. Life support telemetry that showed, against every calculation our systems could produce, 114 surviving cryogenic pods still drawing power, still cold, still occupied, still alive. I stared at the data for a long moment. Kel was standing very still beside me, the way young officers stand when they are waiting to be told that what they have found is a mistake. I could not tell her that, because it was not a mistake. I checked it 3 times. "Get me the positional overlay," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She brought it up. The Perseverance was not simply drifting in open space. If it had been drifting in open space, this would have been a difficult recovery operation. It would have required specialized equipment, a medical team, a diplomatic notification to the human colonial authority. It would have been a significant incident. Instead, the Perseverance was inside the Verath Shear. The Verath Shear is what happens when 2 neutron star remnants spiral toward each other at velocities that make the concept of direction meaningless. The gravitational gradient between them does not merely pull, it differentiates. It pulls different parts of the same object at different rates, so that anything larger than a few meters entering the shear zone is stretched and compressed simultaneously, reduced to a long smear of component atoms in a process that our scientists have a technical name for, and that I will not use here because the technical name does not capture the reality of it. The reality of it is that the Verath Shear has been eating everything that wanders into it for the last 6,000 years, and nothing has ever come back out. The Perseverance had drifted into the outer edge of the shear. It was being held, for the moment, in a gravitational eddy. A temporary stability, the way a leaf sometimes spins in the quiet eye of a current before the river takes it. Our models showed the eddy collapsing in approximately 19 hours. After that, The ship and everything in it would be converted to light. 114 pods. 114 people who had been sleeping for 9 centuries, who had climbed into their beds trusting that the universe would be waiting for them on the other side, who did not know they were already dead in the records of the species they were sailing toward. I sat with this information for approximately 40 seconds. Then I opened the distress channel and began making calls. The next 4 hours were agony. I notified the Keth'vali Salvage Authority Central Command. They notified the Deep Space Emergency Council. The Council notified the Shear Zone Safety Board, who notified 3 separate scientific committees, who all agreed within minutes that entering the Verath Shear was categorically impossible with any vessel currently registered in the galactic fleet. The gravitational differentials would destroy any ship that crossed the eddy boundary. Any conventional rescue was a death sentence for the rescuer. This was not a matter of courage or resources, it was a matter of physics. Physics, the committees agreed with the gentle certainty of people who have never been the ones doing the dying, could not be argued with. I had 17 conference calls in 4 hours. I spoke with admirals. I spoke with committee chairs. I spoke with a Feldrani diplomat named Counselor Oral, whose bioluminescent filaments had gone the deep violet of genuine distress, who told me with great sorrow that the diplomatic community wished there was something that could be done, and that they would be composing a formal memorial resolution for the 114 souls aboard the Perseverance. A resolution, I noted, that would be ready before the people it was mourning were actually dead. The eddy held. The ship broadcast. 114 telemetry signals blinked on my screen like a question I could not answer. At hour 5, Kel appeared at my elbow again. Her scales had gone from ash to something almost white. "Commander," she said, "there is a vessel on long-range scan. A human vessel. It is already moving toward the shear boundary." I looked at the scan. The ship was not a military vessel. It was not a rescue cutter or a salvage frigate, or any class of ship I would have selected for this situation. It was a Terran-registered wreck-diving sloop, the kind of small, heavily modified craft that human salvage specialists use to pick over derelicts in contested space. The registry identified it as the Lowball. Its listed owner and sole crew member was one Mara Castellano, licensed independent salvage technician, Terran Colonial Authority Certification number 7741 Bravo. Her last 3 logged salvage jobs were a flooded ore processor in the Ket Belt, a collapsed mining station in the Dranthi asteroid cluster, and something described in the log only as the thing on Vega 7 that we do not discuss. I opened a comm channel. "Lowball, this is Vessel-Commander Ssethara Venn of the Keth'vali Salvage Authority vessel Steadfast Hand. You are approaching a Class 0 exclusion zone. Please alter course immediately. This area is designated impassable for all registered vessels." The response came back in approximately 2 seconds. "Yeah, I saw that in the registry. Hey, Commander. Mara Castellano, the Lowball. I'm picking up the Perseverance beacon too. How many pods are we talking?" Her voice was calm. Not performed calm. Not the professional even tone of someone who has trained themselves to sound unafraid. Genuinely, effortlessly calm. The way a person sounds when they are discussing a maintenance schedule or a grocery list. I found it deeply unsettling. 114 confirmed active cryogenic pods, I said. "Ms. Castellano, I must advise you that entry into the Verath Shear is impossible for any vessel in the current registry. The gravitational differentials will destroy your ship before you reach the Perseverance. Multiple scientific committees have confirmed." "Multiple scientific committees," she repeated, and there was a warmth in her voice that I could not entirely interpret. Not mockery, something more like fond recognition. "Right, okay. Can you send me the shear gradient data you've got? Full telemetry, not the summary." I looked at Kel. Kel looked at me. I sent her the data. 47 seconds of silence. "Okay," Mara Castellano said. "Yeah, this is doable. I want to be precise here. I want to be accurate in my record of this moment, because what I felt was not a simple thing. What I felt was the particular variety of disbelief that only arrives when someone says something so disconnected from observable reality that your mind briefly refuses to process the words as language. Ms. Castellano, I said, I've just sent you the same data that 17 independent committee members, 3 admirals, and 4 dedicated shear zone physicists reviewed and determined made rescue impossible. Please clarify how you are reading this data differently from those experts. Well, they're looking at it like it's a wall, she said. I grew up in the Dranthi cluster. We ran zero-G obstacle courses through collapsed mine shafts for fun when I was 12. You don't look at a gradient field like a wall. You look at it like a river. You find where it bends. She paused. I heard something that sounded like her tapping on a console. There's a harmonic eddy on the inner shear boundary. Right side. Probably been there for decades. The neutron remnant's rotation cycle creates it every 11 minutes and 14 seconds. It's small. Really small. But my ship is also really small. And I've got a modified inertial compensator that I maybe shouldn't tell the authority about. I sat with this for a moment. You are describing piloting through a gravitational harmonic window 11 minutes wide, I said slowly, in a modified non-certified salvage sloop, into one of the most dangerous gravitational environments in charted space, to attempt a manual pod extraction from a 900-year-old generation ship alone. 14 seconds, not 11 minutes, she said pleasantly. The window is 14 seconds wide. But yeah, that's the gist. Can you keep feeding me the live gradient data? Real time is better. Kel made a sound beside me. A very small sound. The sound of a young officer who has just realized that the scope of their professional experience has been altered by a single conversation. Ms. Castellano, I said, I cannot authorize this. She did not sound concerned. Good thing I don't need authorization then. I'm a private vessel outside authority jurisdiction. Just need the data feed, Commander. Please. The please was genuine. It was not a demand disguised as a courtesy. It was a real request, and it made the refusal harder. I thought about 114 people in the dark. I turned on the data feed. Thank you, Mara Castellano said. And then, okay, Mac, let's go be stupid. I did not know at the time that she was talking to herself. I learned later that she had done this throughout her career, narrated her own actions aloud in the second person, a habit she'd picked up during the years she spent doing solo salvage runs in the Dranthi cluster, where the comm delay was so severe that talking to yourself was the only conversation you got. She had been talking to herself for so long she had given herself a nickname. Mac, she called herself Mac. What followed defied explanation. I have the telemetry record. I have replayed it many times in the months since. I have shown it to physicists, to engineers, to pilots with more combined flight hours than some civilizations have existed. Every single one of them, without exception, has pointed to the same sequence of maneuvers and said some version of the same thing. This should not have worked. The lowball crossed the shear boundary at 11:47 standard hours, threading the 14-second gravitational window with a precision that our tracking systems initially flagged as a sensor error, because no organic pilot should have been able to react fast enough to hold that line. The inertial compensator she mentioned, the one she should not have told the authority about, was doing work that our engineers later estimated required real-time calculations, updating at a rate of 900 inputs per second. She was doing it manually, by feel. It's like the Dranthi tunnels, she told me afterward, when I asked how she had managed it. Except the tunnels don't move. This is more interesting. She said this the way a person says that a meal is more interesting when there is an unexpected spice in it. Inside the shear, the low ball moved in a path that looked, on our tracking display, like something between a corkscrew and a controlled fall. She was riding the gradient curves, using the differential pressure, the same way a deep-sea creature uses current, letting the shear carry her in the direction she needed to go, and shedding velocity against the harmonic eddies she had identified. Kel was standing so close to my console that I could feel the warmth off her scales. She was not speaking. She was not taking notes. She was simply watching. How is she doing that? Kel whispered. I did not have an answer. I have thought about the question many times since. I am still not certain I have a good one. The Perseverance was visible on the optical feed now. 900 years of deep space had not been kind to it. The outer hull was cratered with micro-impacts. Entire sections of the superstructure had collapsed inward, and the slow rotation that the original designers had built in for artificial gravity had degraded into a lazy, irregular tumble. It was a beautiful ship, in the way that very old and very broken things are sometimes beautiful. It had been built by people who did not know anyone was waiting for them, who climbed into their steel cathedral and aimed it at a star and trusted the universe. The low ball matched its tumble in 40 seconds. I watched the docking clamps extend. "Okay," Mara Castellano said over the comm. Her voice had not changed, still that same easy warmth. "I'm in. Give me status on the pods." We gave her the status. Of the 114 active pods, 9 were in sections of the ship too structurally compromised to reach safely. Those 9 signals had already begun to fluctuate. The power cells were failing. 105 remained in 2 intact cryo bays in the midsection. Reachable, transferable, if she moved fast enough. 19 hours is the eddy collapse, she said. It was not a question. 16 hours now, I told her. Okay. A pause. The sound of her moving through the ship, her boots on metal. What's the manual pod release protocol on a 2089 model cryo system? We looked it up. Kel found it in the historical archive, buried in a technical document that had not been accessed in 200 years. We read her the specifications. Great, she said. That's great. These are actually easier to operate than the Dranthi mining pods. Those ones had a physical bolt lock that you had to hit exactly right or the release mechanism would freeze. These just need a manual pressure cycle and a code key. Do you have the master code key for the Perseverance? We did not have the master code key for the Perseverance. Right, she said. No worries. I'll figure it out. Kel looked at me. I looked at Kel. Figure it out. Kel repeated quietly under her breath, in the tone of someone cataloging a phrase they have never heard used in this context. We listened to Mara Castellano work. She narrated as she went. Not for us, I think, but for herself, maintaining the internal monologue that had kept her company through years of solo salvage. She described what she was seeing. The cryo bay, miraculously intact, the rows of pods still glowing with their soft blue status lights, the smell of 9 centuries of recycled air that hit her when she cracked the inner airlock. She described the pod mechanisms working through the access panels by feel in the sections where the lighting had failed. She described the sound the ship made, a low harmonic groan that the shear was producing in the hull. She said it sounded like an old building settling at night. Then she went quiet for a moment, and her voice when it came back was different. Not frightened, not professional, something quieter than both. "Hey, Commander," she said. "I've got a kid here." I remember the exact quality of the silence that followed those 4 words. Not the silence of an empty channel. The silence of a person who has found something that has rearranged the furniture of their understanding and is standing very still inside the new room. "A child," I repeated. "Pod 477, she said. "Mid-bay, 3rd row from the back. Girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old by the look of her. Pod's been running on reserve power. The primary cell gave out a long time ago. She's got maybe 3 hours of backup left, maybe less. Her readouts are still green, but the power curve is..." A pause. "It's not good, Commander." I pulled up the telemetry from Pod 477 on my console. She was right. The power curve was not good. The backup cell was depleting faster than the standard curve, the way old cells do when they have been asked to work too long. 3 hours was optimistic. "Can you transfer her first?" I asked. "Already moving her," Mara said. "She's light. Pod frame is intact. I've got a dolly from the low ball." The sound of wheels on metal plating, a soft, careful sound, the sound of someone moving very slowly on purpose. She's got her hands folded on her chest, like she's just sleeping. I realized something in that moment that kept me awake for many nights afterward. I had been thinking about this rescue as a logistics problem. 114 data points, power curves and gradient windows and extraction timelines. I was very good at logistics problems. I had spent 27 years getting good at logistics problems, because that is what the work asks of you, the reduction of catastrophe into a sequence of manageable variables. Mara Castellano was in a failing ship inside an active gravitational shear zone, alone, with 16 hours until the eddy collapsed and everyone inside it became light. And she was moving slowly. She was moving slowly because there was a sleeping child on a wheeled dolly, and she did not want to jostle her. That is not a logistics calculation. That is something else. I am not certain I have the correct word for it in my language. We have a concept in Keth'vali that translates roughly as the weight of the specific, the difference between understanding that many people are suffering and standing next to one of them. The way that the second experience contains something the first one never can, no matter how large the number gets. Mara Castellano was deep inside the weight of the specific, in a place that should have killed her, and she was moving slowly. "What's her name?" Kel asked, quietly beside me. Not to me, to no one, to the open channel. Mara heard it. "Don't know yet," she said. "Pod registry is water damaged. Hey, kid." Her voice dropped, became something private even over the open comm. "Hey, don't know if you can hear anything in there. Probably not. But just in case. You're gonna be okay. We're gonna get you out of that box." A small pause. "It's a little crazy out here, I'm not going to lie to you. The neighborhood has gone downhill since you left. But there's people waiting. Lots of them. You'll like it." I heard Kel make the small sound again, the one from before. But this time it was not the sound of professional disorientation. This time it was the sound of someone trying not to show that something had reached them. Mara got the child's pod locked into the lowball's cryo interface in 40 minutes. Then she went back in. The next 14 hours were a precise, relentless machinery of effort. I have the full log. I have reviewed it many times, and I will not relay every minute of it here because some things are diminished by narration. Some things need to be understood as a weight, not a sequence. She transferred 105 cryogenic pods across an umbilical connection between two ships, one of which was a 900-year-old derelict, tumbling in a gravitational shear zone, the other of which was a salvage sloop, rated for a crew of 3 that was currently carrying 1. She moved pods that weighed with their occupants between 200 and 400 kilograms each. She did it alone. The lowball was not built for this volume. She reconfigured the cargo hold 3 times during the process to fit more units, using tie-down points that were not rated for cryosuspension, and modifying them with equipment from the Perseverance's own repair lockers. I watched her do calculations in real time over the comm, checking load tolerances against the lowball's structural specs, which she appeared to have memorized. "That shouldn't hold," I told her at one point, watching the sensor readout for her cargo configuration. "Probably not technically," she agreed, not slowing down. "But it only needs to hold for about 14 hours, and then we're out of the shear, and I can do a proper rig." Physics is more like guidelines sometimes. I did not know how to respond to this. I do not know how to respond to it now. At hour 9, she stopped talking for 40 minutes. Just the sound of movement, effort, the occasional grunt of someone moving something heavy in low gravity. I thought about asking if she was all right. I did not ask. I think I already knew that the question would have annoyed her. At hour 10, a portion of the Perseverance's midsection separated from the main hull and drifted into the shear. The sound it made on the structural sensors was a long, low note, almost musical. The kind of sound a massive thing makes when it is finally allowed to stop holding itself together. "That was close," Mara said after a moment. "How close?" I asked. "Close enough that I now have a new least favorite sound," she said. "I'm fine. Keep going." At hour 12, I had my first conversation with someone outside the operation who was paying attention. The Feldrani diplomatic cruiser Undying Sympathy had moved into observation range, running dark so as not to disturb what Counselor Oral called, over a private channel, the situation. Orel's bioluminescent filaments were cycling between violet and white, which I had learned in previous diplomatic dealings, indicated the state of being torn between protocol and feeling. "Is she going to make it?" Orel asked me. "I do not know," I said. "Our instruments show the eddy stability degrading ahead of schedule." "I know." A pause. Orel's filaments went fully white, which I had not seen before. "She is remarkable," Orel said quietly. "I have been watching the telemetry. What she is doing with that ship. The way she moves in there." The filaments dimmed slightly. "We put the memorial resolution in draft, you know, for the people on the Perseverance. We were very prepared for them to die." "I know," I said. "I think I am ashamed of that," Orel said in the careful tone of someone examining a new feeling. "I did not have anything to offer. I think I was ashamed of it too." At hour 13, Kel, who had not left the operations deck for the entire duration, touched my arm. I had not been touched unexpectedly in many years. I am not, in general, a person who is touched. I turned to look at her. Her copper scales had gone through several colors in the last 13 hours. They had settled, in the last few, on something I can only describe as intent, the color of someone who has decided something. "Commander," she said, "she's going to make it." It was not a calculation. It was not an assessment. It was the kind of statement that very young people make when they have not yet learned to cushion their conviction with probability ranges. I looked at the telemetry. The eddy was degrading. The timeline had compressed. She had 93 pods transferred, 12 remaining. "She has to move faster," I said. "She knows that," Kel said. And then, as if Mara Castellano had heard us across 1,400 kilometers of shear space and gravitational noise, her pace changed. I watched it on the sensor feed. The interval between pod transfers, which had been averaging 9 minutes and 40 seconds for the last 6 hours, suddenly dropped. 8 minutes. 6. 4.5. She was not resting between transfers anymore. She was moving from the Perseverance to the lowball and back in a continuous loop, not stopping, not pausing, burning through whatever reserve she had been keeping. "Mac," I heard her say to herself, over the open channel, in the second-person narration she used when she was deep in it. "Come on, Mac, 12 more. You've moved heavier things. Remember the Vega 7 thing. This is nothing. This is easy." What happened on Vega 7, I later discovered, involved manually extracting a 600-ton ore processing unit from a collapsed tunnel in complete darkness, using only mechanical leverage and what she described as stubbornness. The Authority has her a commendation for it that she never collected. She moved 12 pods in 41 minutes. Then she was back on the lowball, and the umbilical was retracting, and I was watching the eddy stability index count down the way you watch a thing that you cannot stop and cannot look away from. 105, she said. Plus the kid, 106. "Commander, I'm going to need you to walk me back out through the window. The gradients shifted since I came in." "The window has changed position," I told her, because it had. The neutron remnants rotation had moved the harmonic eddy. It was no longer where it had been when she entered. "Okay," she said. Not a question. Not a protest. An acknowledgement and an acceptance in a single word. "Where is it?" "We found it." It took 3 minutes of analysis, Kel doing the calculations faster than I had ever seen her work, her copper scales flushed warm with focus. "Bearing 27 Mark 9, Kel said. 12-second window this time, opens in 4 minutes. "Copy that," Mara said. 4 minutes. The next 4 minutes were the longest of my career. I have commanded ships in debris storms. I have overseen the recovery of vessels from unstable orbits. I have lost crew members to accidents that I have reviewed many times in the years since, looking for the variable I could have changed. I know what it is to wait for an outcome you cannot affect, to sit in the chair that is positioned exactly far enough from the danger to be useless. 4 minutes. The lowball moved to bearing 27 Mark 9. The window opened. She went through it in 11 seconds. The cheer that went up on the operations deck of the Steadfast Hand was not a professional sound. It was not the sound that Keth'vali military officers make when a situation resolves satisfactorily. It was a raw, unorganized sound, the kind that bypasses all the training and the procedure and the rank, and comes from somewhere older than any of those things. Kel grabbed my arm with both hands, and then immediately let go, and stood very straight, and looked at the wall, her scales flushing through every color she had. On the comm channel, there was quiet. Then, "Okay," Mara Castellano said. "Okay. I need about 20 minutes and then we can start talking about transfer to your medical bay. I've got 106 people who've been asleep for a long time and they're going to be very confused." A pause. "Also, I could eat. Does the steadfast hand have food?" Kel made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Yes," I said. My voice was not entirely steady. "We have food." "Great," she said. "Something hot, if that's possible. I've been at this for a while." I realized then that she had been moving without stopping for 14 hours, in zero gravity, alone, moving objects that weighed up to 400 kilograms. She had not complained once. She had not asked for acknowledgement or encouragement or rest. She asked for something hot to eat. I walked to the observation port while we waited for the lowball to dock. It is a small port, not designed for looking out of, not positioned for any useful operational purpose. I went there sometimes in the early hours of a long transit, when the operations deck had the particular quiet of a place where everyone is doing their work and nothing is on fire. I went there, and I looked at the Verath Shear. It was beautiful, in the way of violent things. Two stellar remnants coiling toward each other across a measurable distance, their gravitational fields braided into patterns of light and distortion that shifted as I watched. In 6,000 years, they would meet. The resulting event would briefly outshine every star in this sector. Somewhere in those coiling patterns, the Perseverance was tumbling into dissolution. The eddy had collapsed 40 minutes after the lowball came through. The old ship had lasted 900 years, and then, at the end, it had lasted exactly long enough. I thought about the people who built it, who had packed 11,000 humans into a steel cathedral and aimed it at a star before they knew the galaxy was waiting. I thought about the faith that required, and the particular kind of faith it was. Not faith that they would be welcomed, because they did not know there was anyone to welcome them, but faith that arrival itself was worth the journey, that whatever was on the other side was worth the long dark between. I wondered if the child in Pod 477 had been born on the ship, or had boarded it as a small person, young enough that her parents had made the choice for her. I wondered if she had fallen asleep holding someone's hand. I went back to the operations deck. The awakening took 3 days. 106 humans, emerging from 9 centuries of cold, blinking at a medical bay that was not the one they remembered, in a station that was not the one they were sailing toward, surrounded by beings they had never imagined. The Keth'vali medical staff were, to their considerable credit, very professional about this. They had been briefed. They had visual representations of what to expect. They had translation matrices and cultural documentation and a full team of xenopsychologists. It was still chaos, not violent chaos. Not the chaos of fear or conflict, the chaos of people who are profoundly, overwhelmingly overwhelmed, who are receiving too much information at once and have no framework to hold it. 900 years of history, arriving all at once in small rooms, to people who fell asleep in 2089 and woke up in a future that had been accumulating without them. Mara Castellano spent those 3 days in the medical bay. She was not required to. She had completed the rescue. She had been examined by our medical team, who found that she had microfractures in 3 fingers of her left hand, significant muscular strain across her upper back and shoulders, and a dehydration level that our physician described as impressive in a tone that was not complimentary. She was told to rest. She thanked them and went to the medical bay. I observed her, when I had reason to pass through, sitting with the waking colonists. Not counseling them, not explaining things, mostly listening or sitting quietly in proximity, or helping someone walk to the observation port to see their first real stars in 9 centuries. She was very good at being present without taking up too much space. It is a skill that is rarer than it sounds. The child's name was Yui. She had been 7 when her parents boarded the Perseverance. She had celebrated her 8th birthday, according to the pod records, in cryosleep, the birthday logged by the ship's automatic system in a file that had been sitting unread for 900 years. She was the youngest survivor. She woke on the 2nd day, and her first coherent word, once the translation matrix had been calibrated for her accent, was Mama. I was not in the room for what followed. I have the duty nurse's report. The report notes that Ms. Castellano remained with Yui for the duration of that first hour, and that when Yui asked where her parents were, Ms. Castellano told her the truth and held her hand throughout, and did not try to make it smaller than it was. The report does not go into further detail. I am glad, I think, that the duty nurse had the discretion not to. What I know is that by the end of the 3rd day, Yui was following Mara Castellano around the medical bay like a small, determined shadow. Within hours of the rescue, the news had spread through the communication networks in the way that large, strange things spread. Not gradually, but all at once, a sudden saturation, as if the information had been waiting in potential and simply needed permission to exist. Every major outlet in the colonial network ran it. The Feldrani Diplomatic Corps issued a formal statement that was, unusually for Feldrani formal statements, short. It said, "We were wrong about what was possible." Within the week, there were 3 separate proposals in the Galactic Council for a new classification of emergency salvage operations, all of them citing the Verath Shear incident. The Keth'vali Salvage Authority opened a formal review of shear zone approach protocols. The Historical Curiosity Archive received 14,000 requests for information about the other generation ships, the ones still listed as derelicts, as hazards, as closed files. The Human Colonial Authority contacted me directly. The woman I spoke with was a senior administrator named Director Okonkwo, who had the eyes of someone who had spent a long time managing impossible situations and had made a kind of peace with that. She thanked me for the data feed I had provided to Mara Castellano. I told her that I had provided it for the 106 people in the pods, not for her government, and she smiled and said that she knew that, and thanked me anyway. She also told me something that I found myself returning to in the weeks that followed. She said that Mara Castellano had turned down the Colonial Authority's formal commendation. Not refused it exactly. Requested it be given instead to a search and rescue team on Vega 7 that had assisted her on a previous job and had never received proper recognition for it. She had done this quietly, without announcement, without asking for credit for the gesture. I sat with that for a long time. The formal recognition ceremony was held 6 weeks after the rescue. Mara Castellano attended in the salvage clothes she had worn on the lowball, cleaned and pressed, which was apparently as formal as she intended to get. Kel, who had been assigned as the authority's liaison for the proceedings, told me afterward that when she asked if Mara wanted help finding something more appropriate to wear, Mara had looked down at her outfit with mild surprise and said, "What? This doesn't work." The Keth'vali Salvage Authority awarded her the Deep Space Recovery Medal First Class. The first time it had been awarded to a human. The second time it had been awarded at all in 19 years. The Feldrani Diplomatic Corps awarded her the Filament of Recognition, which is their highest civilian honor. Counselor Oral personally draped it over her shoulders. Oral's filaments were the warm gold of genuine happiness, which I had also not seen before, and the sight of those golden filaments against Mara Castellano's ordinary salvage jacket struck me as something that would stay with me, though I could not have said exactly why. Mara's speech, in its entirety, was 4 sentences. I did my job. A lot of people helped, including Commander Venn and her crew, and a young analyst named Kel who should be running her own ship in about 5 years. The Perseverance survivors have had a hard journey. I hope we do right by them. Then she sat down. I watched the room. I watched the senior officials and the diplomats and the committee members who had, 6 weeks ago, been composing memorial resolutions for people who were still alive. I watched them begin a sustained applause that lasted, by my count, 3 minutes. Mara Castellano looked quietly at the floor through most of it, I returned to the Verath Shear survey route 4 months after the incident. Routine assignment. The neutron remnants do not care about human salvage technicians or galactic recognition ceremonies. They continue their long, coiling fall toward each other, and someone has to log the data. On the second day of the survey, I received a message from Kel. She was back at the academy for her advanced command certification, the one that had been fast-tracked after the incident. The message was brief. It said, "Yui started school this week. There is a photo." I looked at the photo. A small girl with cropped dark hair, standing in a corridor that I recognized as the children's education wing of Waystation Keth-4. She was wearing a backpack that was slightly too large for her. She was grinning. She looked in that way that children sometimes do, entirely unconcerned about the 9 centuries she had missed. I forwarded it to Counselor Oral without comment. Oral wrote back within the hour. The message contained no words, just an image of their filaments, lit gold. I looked at the shear through the observation port for a long time that night. I thought about Kel's question, the one she had whispered in the early hours of the rescue. How is she doing that? I had been thinking about it for 4 months, turning it over, examining it from the angles that my training gave me. The physics answer was, modified inertial compensator, practiced spatial reasoning, 15 years of solo salvage in structurally unstable environments. The tactical answer was, she identified a solution vector that committee thinking had foreclosed, and she exploited it. Those answers are both correct. They are also both wrong. The answer that kept me awake, that I could not committee think my way around, was simpler and more unsettling. Mara Castellano went into the Verath Shear because there were people in it, not because she was ordered to. Not because there was recognition waiting on the other side, not because she had calculated that the odds were survivable. She went in because there were people in it, and she could move, and there was a window, and those 3 facts were simply sufficient. That was the whole of the equation. I had been in this work for 27 years. I knew rescue. I knew the literature on individual risk tolerance, on hero behavior, on the documented exceptions to self-preservation that appear across species. I thought I understood the shape of this thing. I did not understand the shape of this thing. What else are they capable of? I have asked this question to colleagues, over drinks, in the careful way you ask questions when the answer might be inconvenient. The answers I get are usually cheerful, usually reassuring. Humans are our partners in the colonial authority. They are reliable. They follow treaties. They are, as a civilization, young and enthusiastic and occasionally baffling, but fundamentally manageable. I think about a salvage sloop called the Lowball. I think about a 14-second gravitational window. I think about the fact that she found that window by growing up playing in collapsed mines for fun. I think about the generation ships still listed in the Historical Curiosity Archive. 41 of them. 41 steel cathedrals aimed at stars by people who did not know the galaxy was waiting. Filed as derelicts. Filed as hazards. Filed as closed. I think about what happens when humanity notices them. The galaxy has spent a great deal of time deciding what humans are. Manageable, predictable, partners, assets, junior members of a civilization that was already ancient when their species was still learning which plants were safe to eat. I was one of the ones who thought this. I stood at the observation port and watched the Verath Shear coiling in the dark, and I thought about Mara Castellano moving slowly through a failing ship with a sleeping child on a dolly, talking to her through the ice. I thought about 4 sentences in a formal recognition ceremony. I thought about a commendation quietly rerouted to a team she thought deserved it more. I thought about the species that built 11,000-person ships and aimed them at stars they had never seen, on faith alone, before they knew anything was waiting. We had been watching them for 200 years. We had not been watching carefully enough. We looked at the Perseverance survivors and saw a rescued population. We looked at the Verath Shear and saw an impassable boundary. We looked at Mara Castellano and saw an ordinary salvage technician in clothes that were not formal enough for the ceremony. We had looked at all of it. We had not seen any of it. I filed my survey report at 600 the next morning. Standard observations. neutron remnant positions, gravitational index readings, minor debris signatures in the outer shear boundary. Routine, professional, the kind of thing that slots cleanly into the known universe and stays there. At Aero 612, I received the monthly update from the Human Colonial Authority. It included, as it always did, a list of registered vessel movements, private craft, commercial haulers, survey ships. I scrolled through the list without much attention until I reached the last entry. Lowball, Terran registered salvage sloop. Owner, Mara Castellano. Current assignment, independent survey. Historical curiosity archive derelicts. Sector 7 through 12. Sector 7 through 12 contained 9 of the 41 generation ships. I sat with this information for a long moment. Then I set the report aside and looked back out at the Verath Shear, at its beautiful and indifferent violence, and I thought about 200 years of careful watching and what we had missed. We had found them among the stars and named them manageable. We had offered them our civilization like a gift and expected gratitude. We had written their dead into archives and moved on, because that is what civilizations do. They triage. They close files. They learn which things can be saved and which things cannot, and they make peace with the mathematics. We had welcomed them. We had given them treaties and trade routes and seats at tables that had existed for longer than their species had been writing things down. We had looked at them and seen something we recognized. We had looked at them and called them ours to understand. We had been so certain of what they were. We had no idea what they were. We had welcomed wolves into every room we had. We had shown them the archives and the shear zones and the closed files and the 41 abandoned cathedrals drifting in the dark. We had smiled and called them young, and called them manageable, and called them ours. And somewhere in Sector 7, a salvage sloop with a modified inertial compensator and one very quiet human was already moving toward the first closed file. We had called them sheep. We had been so sure.